Okay. So I am fairly warned. From now on, my words will be recorded. The one thing I would say about this class, I welcome people bringing Bibles because one of the questions each evening will pertain to, is there some story from Jesus or someone else that pertains to this issue? And
Bibles over there. Yeah.
and I would welcome you bringing pins, not necessities, but encouraging you to. Tonight we're starting into this series, and but we're doing a preamble first because I think almost all the topics here lend itself to the possibility of drawing on our emotions, drawing on heartstrings, means we may go deep from time to time, and that can lead to substantial disagreement. We see something quite differently. And so I thought, rather than really spending a unit on it right now, we would look at learning to disagree agreeably, a first look. And but it would be kind of a good preamble for most of these classes the first times we look at some of these things. So with that in mind, what have you learned from your life experiences that facilitate disagreeing agreeably? That is learning to discuss serious matters graciously and productively. And we're not going to spend long here, but because I do want to spend time on the unit we have. But learning to disagree agreeably. Where have you seen it done, and what made that work? What was going on?
Dale, this is Art, if it's okay to jump in. I don't have a specific example, but I might suggest that when you recognize the person is more important than the matter that you're disagreeing about, then you move on.
Yeah. I have a great example in my life. Wendell Gunn, whom I do not agree with anything on anything with him on. No, that's not true. We find it sounds to begin with, when Wendell and I start talking, that we don't agree about anything, but as we actually start talking, we find we agree a lot. But we get into, we see things politically, economically, and other ways in some very different ways. And yet we have the best of discussions, laugh a lot, and everything goes great. One of the reasons why is Wendell has taught me this, and I think he said it in classes he's been part of, that when he's in a discussion with somebody, where he goes pretty quickly is, well, okay, what is your vision? You know, with regard to what we're talking about now, what do you want? I mean, what do you see as being a good here? What would you be happy with? What would you think was flourishing life, for instance? And he lives that out, and consequently makes conversations a whole lot more important, because what that does is it brings up very quickly how much people who think they're disagreeing actually have in common, because often the vision, what they're hoping for, is pretty similar across broad economic and political spectrums, or religious even. What is your vision? Teasing out what is another person's fear, without making them feel like you just said they're afraid. But just the listening for what they're afraid of, because chances are that's what's going on. That they're afraid of something, they want something, and trying to get down below the actual discussion going on to what is that fear, because often when when they see that you're addressing the fear, it brings the conversation much closer together, and you move in more productive directions once you know that. I would suggest that generally, for our purposes, and I'm drawing on something from 12-step practices, I think the term they use, I know the principle that they're dealing with, but I think the term they use is no cross-talking. And by that, I take them to mean, although this is not the definition I found when I looked up cross-talking today, but what I understand it to be, when a person has the floor, nobody directly contests them. In other words, if you disagree with what they said, positively state what you believe, as opposed to negatively what you disagree with. But let them keep the floor, but when your turn comes and you have a substantial difference, simply state that positively, what it is that you stand for and what you believe. I think that's a little rigorous, and it's not something we actually need to do. No cross-talking. I would say watch cross-talking. Other ways to do it. But don't worry about it. But remember that a productive conversation isn't usually improved by immediately contesting a point you differ on. You start with the positive, what you do agree on. That's kind of where Wendell was. And I learned this from Charles Ricks this Sunday morning in class. He's in a program in which people critique one another's works, and he said that one of the principles they follow is if critical, if you need to criticize, if you're feeling critical, frame it as a question. Frame it as a question. And now, I immediately thought of Bill Cochran. Bill Cochran was the master of
understand.
Help me understand. Help me, I heard you say such and such. Help me understand. Now, the reason he was really effective at that, well, one of the reasons he was really effective at that is he really meant it.
Mm-hmm.
But he did feel a significant dissonance with what you had just said, but he would like to understand it, and he'd like to see that that we're both trying to pull in good directions, and so help me understand. If critical, frame it as a question, and always, and I learned this from Debbie over the years. And the skill set of counselors, active listening, by which I mean being able to reiterate the other person's point, is a good goal to get to. When you find, I'm not sure you and I are going to agree, but I do think it's fair enough that we each should be able to reiterate what the other person said. Now I understand you to mean this. Am I correct? This is what I heard. Is that and sometimes that's as far as you're going to get. But that's somewhere. I mean, if you both kind of clarified with one another that yes, that is what I'm trying to say. At least the person feels like they're understood. They feel like they've been heard. And that's half the goal. James?
Yeah, what do you mean by cross talking?
Talking across one another is, I guess, what they mean by the phrase.
Well, I think what I've heard people describe of situations in 12-step programs, there's a speaker and then there's a sharing time, and they can go around and each person gets a few minutes, or sometimes they time it, sometimes they don't. But you say, yes, I want to say something. So whatever the topics they're talking about, they have a moment. And so let's say it's my turn, and then it's Kathy's turn. So when it's my turn, nobody says, Well, I disagree with you, or I was thinking it's more like that. It's not like you just take your turn and then the next person says whatever they choose to say. Not necessarily in reference to what I just said, maybe, but you don't really try to make it in reference to what I just said. You just move on to the next person, saying what they intend to say.
To me,
Does that make
Well,
sense?
yeah, to me, it's like interrupting somebody while they're trying to explain their point of
let them
view.
finish.
Exactly.
Let them finish. That's step one, and the most important.
Pound them.
Is let them.
Then you pound them.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if
Yeah.
you're gonna pound them, at least you heard everything that they said, because.
You probably have a very good reason to.
Yeah, exactly, you heard, yeah.
But in 12-step program, they don't even go there, you know,
Right.
they
Right.
say, it's just, I state what I want to state at the moment. Kathy says what she wants to say, Eddie says what he wants to say, and there's no, like, let me tell you what I think, there's nothing like that.
It's not a direct confrontation when it can be handled
Yeah.
obliquely and when it can be handled by you stating positively what you believe about that, which might be very different from what she believes.
Mhm.
But it's not, Debbie, I think you're wrong. I believe this. Leave out the first part of it.
Mhm.
Just say about that particular thing. This is what I've always thought. This is what I believe.
Right.
Even though Debbie is wrong.
So I'm wrong.
Okay, so,
CTL?
yeah. Rob,
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, you were talking about that actively listening thing,
yeah,
and this is observation I've made. I think Chris Altrek does it very good in classes. I've watched him. People will say something and he'll paraphrase it right to the point.
Mhm.
So it's just something I noticed.
I'm gonna be facetious here. He is very good at that.
Mhm.
But part of that is because at times the sound hasn't been able to pick up what the person says. So he repeats what the person says, so the person online can hear it. But he knows how to do that, whether he needs to do that or not. But I'm just saying that's one of the things you're hearing.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's a perfect example. When he does that, he's doing exactly what we're talking about. Okay, I'm going to move on to the issue tonight, which for title purposes, I came up with managing manipulation. Now, I'm not sure that's the best title, but the issue is manipulation, and when you're feeling manipulated, how you feel about that and how you respond to that. And I think most of us, almost as soon as I say that, can say, oh, I think maybe that's happened to me. So when you feel that someone is manipulating, let's say, the system or the group. This was not in the original list. This is a suggestion that was made, and I'm wide open to those. In fact, I have sheets here for the people here, the 2-page sheet on checking what you might be interested in and adding any that you may wish to. So, that it's not an assignment, but it is, I'm wide open, and when people have ideas, I definitely want to hear them. But anyway, in light of Christian faith and scripture, and you may consult, if you wish, our standards and measures in the appendix. So you go over to page 3. When I'm teaching, that will be a constant part of the sheet that's handed out. Those are go-to texts. Paul breaking the commandments down simply to loving your neighbor as yourself. Jesus' new command the night before he dies, love one another as I've loved you. The definitions and descriptions of love in 1 Corinthians 13. Philippians 2 and 4, each of you should look not to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. And then the golden rule. And so those will always be there. And there are many other texts in scripture that help us with love. But essentially, as we come to each issue, in light of those scriptures, we're exploring together ways you might act, speak, and think in ever more loving ways when you feel someone is manipulating the system or the group. Okay, the first question, Because I think this is actually a fairly broad category. By which I mean manipulation takes lots of forms. And so I'm beginning with, under what circumstances has this been your experience in the past? Or more broadly, under what circumstances can you picture this happening?
I'll jump in. I think I did campaigns Northeast for 5 years. We knocked on doors. And basically, I told people they were going down. And I used that as a premise to convert them to the Church of Christ. I would say I was sincere, but I'd say a lot of it was manipulation.
Okay. And that's a tough question. I mean, because evangelism per se can be done very productively and lovingly, but it does lend itself to being manipulative. And there are certain sort of situations in which it encourages manipulation. You know, notches in your belt. You know, I mean, the ways it's stressed are bound to pull out of a fearful person manipulative things to achieve something. Other examples of when you feel that someone is manipulating the system or a group. Give me some examples of what that looks like, how that's done.
Can I give one more?
Yeah, sure.
Chris Altrock and Kendra had me watch Dasher Saturday and do the Sermon on the Mount on Sunday.
All right, and we have that on tape.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's good.
That's called double dipping.
He never.
We have a rule about getting the senior minister out of town for a week here, so we can talk about that.
It's a fine old tradition.
Actually, major companies essentially have that rule. You have to be gone for a 2-week period. So we can kind of.
Vent and decompress and reset for your return.
Okay, other
Yeah.
examples.
Dale,
Dale,
Yeah,
Oh.
Art.
you
go
go.
ahead. No, please, Joanne, Sylvia, please.
Sylvia.
Okay, I was just remembering back at some of the gospel meetings we used to have in Birmingham. And at the end, when they would sing Just As I Am, probably 20 times, you know, and look at certain people, like one person would go down and then, I don't know, that it was just pressure on certain people that you were trying to get to go down and be saved. And it was very manipulative feeling at the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes people were like, okay, here I go. You know?
Just to
You
shut
gotta-
him
It's
up.
not
Gotta
that
let the
one
poor
more
guy
verse,
up front
just
off
as
the
I
hook
am.
here. Looks lonely up there. I better go up.
I think this is a really tough topic though to talk about because manipulation is just, it's really a form of communication. And
Right.
how are we using our communication for what purposes? I mean, so let's say I have a piece of information I need to share with a group or with a person or with a group of people. Is it manipulation when I do it in a very nuanced way, so I know that people are hearing me? Is it manipulation when I pace it and I only give out certain amount of information at any particular time? Is it manipulation because I don't tell everything I know to the room? You know,
Yeah.
someone.
Strategy manipulation.
It's strategy manipulation. Is it, or is it sometimes, and sometimes it isn't? What makes it manipulation? What makes it not? Because even like what you just said and what Sylvia said, that can be done still with a great amount of good intention and no intention of harm. But I don't think any of us just communicate straightforward. I mean, even when you think about when we read Jesus's words, he had intention. He wanted those to have a certain impact.
Yep.
So is having a certain impact manipulative?
So that's a question will be be sitting there from here on. I'm gonna come back and give an example of that, but Art.
I was hoping I could share one, and at least where my mind goes on this, and I have some other examples, but it's pretty fresh, meaning it's pretty recent, and you know, I just heard about it in the news. So there was a young family of 6 that were in a fiery car crash
Mhm.
fairly recently in New York, and 5 of the 6 occupants in the car died.
Mhm.
And so the family tried to, other than deal with the sorrow of the death, they have a need, and their need is to, I'll say, bury the 5 that died. And so a GoFundMe page was created for that family. And then there was a quote unquote scam page that was created to draw some money away from that occurrence. And so the manipulation of the system, meaning, you know, pulling on people's heartstrings to get money for their own purposes, is, I might say, you know, grossly manipulative.
Mhm.
And so I'm just not sure if I were to meet whoever created this fraudulent web page, if I am supposed to meet that person as a loving neighbor and just accept what they did.
Mhm.
And so that's a manipulation that, you know, seems intolerable, as well as might go against the golden rule.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So what do we do
Another
there?
example? Do you want to share another one?
Well, you know, and again, I'm not so much geared, you know, from a monetary perspective, but that's an example. You know, I sometimes think of when I think of the system or group, you know, I might even think of a benevolent system, whether it's some sort of financial support or not, and whether or not the true need is there. And if they recognize that if they could present a certain case that would make at least appear, and I say this cautiously because I really wouldn't know, but make it appear as if there's a need, that's a manipulation. And whether or not that's an acceptable manipulation, and whether or not we should maintain the golden rule, well, you know, I have to love that person because he or she's my neighbor. Or, you know, we're all, you know, made of the image of God, and we all should, I mean, there may be underlying reasons why they're doing that, but they may not be good intended underlying reasons.
Right.
So, I mean, that's an example.
That's a great example. And you know, as someone who's often had to field the person who drops by the church that we don't know at all, and needs gas to get to such and such a place. And you know, you've heard that kind of story 100 times, and you don't know. I mean, sometimes it seems very legitimate very quickly.
Dale, Kathy had
Yeah.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
No,
That's the
no,
same
that's
time.
just, no, we're just looking for the examples, and that's,
Yeah,
that's
that's
a
one
good
of
one.
the ones I was thinking about, was that kind of, because I've had to be occasionally, not frequently, thank you, but brought in on those kind of situations because Falls Church always had 2 people, a male and a female, always talk to whomever it was.
Mm,
And you had to, you know, kind of break it down and judge. And then we had regulars on which we had files, and people, we had large files. And
oh,
some-
wow,
You know, so we had,
your location.
yeah, the location where you were was, but, and we had a budget for that sort of thing and stuff like that. But it was you know, how manipulative are people being? And but when I think of manipulative, I think of somebody, whether it's us, me doing it would be me not telling all the details, you know, like not telling somebody the pros and cons or whatever, or not saying, you know, there's something about being manipulative that is hiding part of the story.
Right.
You know, that's being, so you're dealing with some sort of it's not quite honest, or it might be honest, but it's certainly not open. You know, because they might be telling you the truth part, but they're not telling you the rest of it. And if I was to be manipulative, that's what I'd be doing. I would, you know.
Yeah.
So, but are we having to love the manipulator? We don't love the manipulation.
Right.
And I'm not gonna chop the head off of the manipulator, but then on the other hand, I have to call it out in some way.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
we'll get to what
Yeah.
to do, but that's a classic example. And we'll get, the next question is going to be, how does it make you feel when you sense you're being manipulated? And these are good examples for, yeah, okay. Someone coming in on something? I would add one, which is a specific form of manipulation, but I hear from time to time, fortunately not all that often, but from time to time, I hear it's said of the church or of a particular person in the church, well, they have an agenda. And that is the sense, a person has a sense, I guess, of being manipulated. And then I sometimes wonder, and we'll get to this if we have time at the end, but then I also find when you accuse someone of having an agenda, sometimes that's a great way to manipulate.
Yeah, it's
I
a
mean,
dismissal of
that
their-
shuts them down.
Yeah.
What you didn't want heard, and we've co-opted another great word. There's nothing wrong with agenda. I mean, my day depends on setting an agenda. Your life depends to some extent on the agenda, but she has an agenda is fighting words. I mean, we can't trust that person. They have an agenda. So, it's a shame that these words get used in that way. And sometimes, the person who feels that way may be correct. At other times, we'll look at it and notice that actually it's the person making the charge that's manipulating the situation by dismissing perhaps the very serious convictions and principles of another person as an agenda, when simply all it means is I'm not comfortable with your viewpoint on that.
Interesting, we don't use the term as much, persuasion,
Yeah.
Or
That's
influence.
Persuasion, influence,
are valuable tools to have, be able to be able to influence and to persuade people of you. That means you're a good communicator,
Right.
Good communicator of your ideas.
And yeah,
And
those words have not been co-opted yet. You can use those.
Yeah, Dale,
Yeah.
can I jump in?
Yes.
Based on that, would it be correct to say that you could disagree agreeably?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, see, and again, I'm not trying to challenge that, other than to say, I'm not really sure. Because again, what I think I was hearing, and again, sometimes there's
You're
nuances.
doing
and
all the things right here.
No, everything's fine.
listening.
There's sometimes there's subtlety and nuances. And so like you hear something like persuasion. Well, persuasion doesn't say that you disagree agreeably. Persuasion says you're trying to change.
Mhm.
You're trying to divert from agreeing. So you're not agreeing, you're not disagreeing agreeably. You're trying to convert, trying to change. So, I'm not really sure if there's total acceptance. And so maybe I'll just leave
Well,
it there.
isn't every Sunday morning sermon persuasion?
No,
Trying
no,
to get us to
and-
move
and-
in a certain direction.
Absolutely, Debbie. I agree with you completely on that.
Mhm.
And so, yes,
Mhm.
those are
I would say
persuasions.
something about persuasion. Persuasion usually is fairly open. There's not that piece of
Mhm.
information you're hiding. Manipulation is hiding something to change.
Right.
Persuasion just feels a little bit more open. Maybe
Yeah.
that's just some nuance I'm
Yeah.
If,
you know.
if it
Yeah,
actually
and
is,
not to jump, go ahead, Dale, please.
if it actually is manipulation, there's a sense of falseness to it. Where persuasion may be absolute truth. And trying to persuade somebody from one view to another view may be important and good and great for them. And if you're doing it truthfully and lovingly, not a particular problem, but there's a sense in manipulation that of deceit, of something maybe a little underhanded, maybe the notion that you're speaking from a power position, and so you'll get away with that. And the person who feels powerless is feeling manipulated. But I mean, there's a sense of falseness and in there, and it's important for us tonight to not be manipulating. But my real concern tonight is I sense I am being manipulated. Now, what am I doing? So what does sensing that you're being manipulated feel like, and why? Well, not good.
It feels like a weight. You know something is wrong. There's some internal going on, and once you realize that someone's trying to manipulate you, I feel better once I know what's going on.
Yeah.
And then you can address it. But sometimes you have to really sit down and think about what's happening in a situation, and really try to parse out all the players and what's happening, to figure that out. Because I mean, you can always trust your gut feeling, and just kind of sit with it a while and think about it. And once you realize that, because it's a shock that people can be manipulating. It really is. If you're going through the world trying to be an honest person and trying to, live a life of love and just trying to live and let live or whatever, there's some people out there that are shocking,
Yeah.
that do
Mhm.
bad things because of the emptiness they feel inside, or whatever their motivations are, And it's first of all, it's kind of a shock that there's a need for that.
It feels like I can't articulate my voice.
Everyone get that?
Yeah.
Okay. Julie?
Dale, I was gonna say, I remember one of the most manipulative persons that I ever remember, and she had a borderline personality, and she knew how to press every button within about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, it would have been impossible to plan it all out. Meaning this is a learned behavior, and some people, they just do it. This is how they've been coping. And they just push all your buttons, get you going, trying to figure out how to get what they want. But they couldn't possibly have thought it through because it's so clever. It's a learned thing that a lot of times I feel good because sometimes I have a manipulation button that just goes, no, I don't think this is danger.
Yeah.
But I don't think a lot of people who are really manipulative people, it's a learned strategy that they can't
Yes.
even stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So maybe that helps you to have more sympathy, to say, because they couldn't possibly plan it.
yeah,
It's too complicated.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
It's so ingrained into their personality that it comes as natural as breathing to some people.
And that's a perfect illustration of the challenge that we're dealing with.
It's just like, when you lie, sometimes it comes natural to people. You lie, and if you're in the eye.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
That's definitely a form of manipulating. Lying is manipulation.
I mean,
Yeah.
You really believe him, but he's lying in your face.
That's right.
What do you do? The question I'm going to ask in most of these cases, and spend more time sometimes than others, less time otherwise, but how is this situation often depicted in movies, TV shows, or books, and with what consequences? And that question is just meant to sort of surface what, what is society's awareness of this issue, and what is its understanding of it? And honestly, society really does not like this. Society doesn't. There, as we've said, there are people that it's ingrained in, but society itself, I'm thinking of on a couple of levels, the old movie 1944 Gaslight. It's a classic movie about manipulation, about making a person feel they're crazy just for thinking the truth on something. And that's iconic study of manipulation. But almost every movie, every TV show I've watched, I'd say in the last 2 weeks, someone has a hidden agenda. The story doesn't go on unless someone is manipulating. That's the core of the story. Someone is manipulating. And usually that turns out to be the villain in a way, but life is more complicated than that. And sometimes it's a fairly good person, but they are still, they still have a hidden, something hidden. They're not playing all their cards. And that's what creates the drama in the story and the tension. And the tension is very much about the person who isn't playing all their cards. Okay, so I think, this is a big subject, and the next question is really there's two areas I want to get to before the end here, and so I'm going to manage time to try to get to both of them. But right now, I want you to think through and maybe share experiences when this has happened to you, or when you experience it happening to someone else. We've done some of that. But what have you learned works? What lessons have you learned? And the other area I want to get to is to spend a little bit of time thinking about Jesus' stories and teachings from his life or other texts in scripture that maybe show us loving ways forward when someone's manipulating the system. I honestly didn't know when I was constructing this lesson plan which question to do first. And in this particular case, I went with what's our experience and what have we learned?
Experience of.
Yeah, we feel we're being manipulated, and what have we learned is effective in those situations? How do
What's the
we?
effective response?
Yes, yeah, whatever that may be.
I do something with, I try to say, I hear you,
Yeah,
and then I'll say what my point is. Not that I agree with them necessarily, but I try to acknowledge what they've said, even though I think it's stupid.
everyone get that?
And I'm sure they probably feel the same thing about me. And they're wrong.
Others. No, that's great. There's little phrases that are really helpful here, and that is one. I hear you. Art.
Dale, I might throw in, sometimes it's okay to give into it. Sometimes, and I think Julie and I have done this sometimes. Sometimes we like to say it's good to do good. And so you allow the manipulation to happen, within reason, but you do good.
Mhm.
And you move on.
You just help someone.
You can't change. You
Mhm.
can't change.
Absolutely.
You have to, but it has to be within reason, of course.
Yeah,
Well, even on the Sermon on the Mount, like when Jesus says, if someone asks for your cloak, give him your tunic as well, it's basically, if they're trying to manipulate something out of you, don't resist them.
Mhm.
yeah.
Dale?
Other
Important.
times,
Oh, Robert?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was trying to flip through my Bible here and it just came to one area I think Jesus wouldn't settle for any manipulation is when he's tested in the wilderness by the devil. And in Matthew chapter
Mm.
4.
Mm,
He's not tolerant of it all,
Mhm.
in my opinion, in that passage.
yeah. He had the real advantage of knowing he was being manipulated. Uh, In that particular case, you know, if Satan comes to me and talks to me, I'm probably going to guess manipulation. But yeah, I mean, but that's a great biblical story for no, Scripture says. But yes, it's you know, at first, you know, I think on some of the issues we're going to look at, it's going to take a fair amount of memory work and creativity to think of what biblical story illustrates that. And I didn't know about this one, but once I really started trying to answer the question myself, Jesus is on this all the time. I mean, the Gospels are filled with counter manipulation. Pharisees manipulating over, and we'll get to some of those. And as Robert says, the story of the temptations itself is a classic case.
I mean, you have to push back on some of it. I mean, I think you have to test it out to see, because I'm with Art and Julie on this a lot of times, you know, when in doubt, somebody asks you for money or whatever, and you think it probably is a good cause, go ahead, I give it to them or whatever. But, you know, where I used to live, I had people coming by my house all the time, selling like magazine subscriptions. And then you kind of get the feeling like, something's about this is just off. This is, you know, or they're raising money to support their soccer team. And you start asking, well, which soccer team? That's great. Which soccer team are you on? Blah, blah, blah. Where is it? You know, where do you practice? And if they can't answer anywhere around there, where they practice, what their neighborhood's from, what street they live on, then, you know, because we had that too. People just came by. It was a great, you know, kids used
See
to
that
joke.
nice neighborhood off the pike?
Yeah, kids used
Yeah.
to just joke how they would make money off
Yeah.
people. And after a while, you think, you know, I think I'll just test this out a little bit more.
Yep.
So I think that it's fine to test it out a little bit and not just give in and say, well, loving thing is to give you $20 or, you know, whatever.
No,
No,
I think it's always fine to test it out. And all my thoughts go in that direction, but then at the end, I came to Art's thought. But sometimes you just
Right.
let it go.
Well, we're really good at, I mean, we've had a lot of characters walk through these doors over the past 60 years. And I'm thinking of one person in particular. I won't, you know, mention this person's name, but the church is a great place to, you know, for people who are manipulative, you know, to land and to take advantage of people. And that's why we have each other, because we have people that are on all different levels of that spectrum. People that will give you their last dime, and then you have people on the opposite end that, you know, are skeptical. And so we need each other, you know, the people that are more open-hearted to say, hey, skeptic, you know, let's give them a chance. And then the skeptic are the people that are more pragmatic. It's like, you've given enough.
right. And what did you do with the
This
last?
person, yeah,
That's what we asked a lot. What did you do with the last 100 we gave you?
right,
Exactly how
right.
did that get spent?
Right,
And then what,
right.
you know.
The first,
Excuse me.
Art,
Dale, I'm sorry, and I don't want to bust things up here, but so.
Of course you do, Mark.
Come on down.
So are we saying that we're supposed to love all of our neighbors or the neighbors that we love?
All of them.
all of them are,
There's no question about that, but we are aware that at some point, loving a person doesn't mean giving them everything they ask for.
I think Art is manipulating us.
Right.
Because of all people I know, Art is the one who loves all people.
Yeah.
But so when he asks this question, that would be a class, no, yes.
I'm sorry.
But keep going, because you to me are the epitome of loving all people. You also, to me, a very good example of, of being street smart and not get taken in. And somehow you find the combination here. Go ahead. What more?
No, no, I didn't really, I was just offering that as an idea. I really didn't have much more besides that. Thank you, though.
Yeah,
To me, the key, oh,
I want to say, I don't hate the person that is trying to get me to give them money falsely. I just want to help them learn that that tact is not going to be a good way for their future to go. It
right.
doesn't mean I thought they're horrible people and should be thrown in jail or something. I just want to say, this is not gonna work for you.
And that can be the most loving thing you can do,
Right.
set them on a new path.
Situation. The most loving thing I can do is have it not work out, gently,
Mhm.
kindly not work out,
Mhm.
all
They
the
could be a
time.
terribly needy person who in desperation is doing this awkward manipulative thing. It
Right,
doesn't mean that's a good course for them.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have another example that's very clear to me of a person who I thought was a friend. Called me up one day and basically accused me of arrogance. Now, I don't think I am, but I knew in that moment that if I started defending myself, it would give them a pretext to tell me how arrogant I was. And so what I said was, you have no idea how arrogant I am. And I agreed with him. And it was silent.
Yeah.
And we have nothing else to talk about. And so, but I felt like that was a manipulation to attack. And I said, well, I don't have to participate with this. And I did.
Yeah. And manipulation often takes that form, and you see people who have their sentences. I mean, I was in a discussion last week and the person I was talking, we were having major differences of ultimate reality and the consequences therefrom. And he looks at me and says, why are you getting so worked up? Because I passionately care about this. Any confusion on your part? But he was trying to delegitimate the value of what I was saying, because see how worked up you are? I wasn't that worked up. I was expressing opinions strongly. But he was trying to win his point by that kind of
Right.
question. James.
Sometimes you just gotta trust God.
Mhm.
Just at the end of the ramp, so the guy with the sign, had one leg,
Mhm.
and am I gonna give to him because he's gonna use it for some drugs or something, or am I gonna give it to him because he's hungry?
Mhm.
I flipped them a bin, and I trust God that he uses it for food.
Mhm.
That's good. I mean, you do have to go there someday. I'm looking at the clock and I'm gonna run through some things I think are important. I think transparency is really good. Transparency is the enemy of manipulation. And to press for transparency is great. I mean, that's the kind of questions you were asking. But it also means you have to be transparent yourself. I mean, if you're talking about within a group or somebody in the group who knows everybody and everybody knows them, they're being manipulative, you have to call for transparency, but you best can legitimately persuade them if they know you are a transparent person, that you don't hold out on them, you tell them what you're thinking. I mean, and so transparency to me is important here. You ask for it, but you also demonstrate it. I think the need for open and wide communication. So say someone is taking advantage of another's good intentions. You call them on it. I mean, you do it lovingly, but you tell the truth, but you let them know you still care about them as a person. But communicate. I mean, the answer to illegitimate communication is proper communication: truthful, straightforward, open, loving. You always have to throw the loving in there, and then you get to do all the other things about truthful. You know, you know, and you're still doing the right thing. The issue is sometimes, you know, we all get kind of triggered, and I'm just going for truthful here. And then I feel bad afterwards because I realized there wasn't a whole lot of love in what I did. I don't maybe won the argument, or, you know, or whatever. Creating a climate of trust, grace, and forgiveness within a church. I think that's fundamentally important, that there be a climate of trust, grace, and forgiveness. In some churches I'm familiar with over the years, not so much. That's not really the climate. But that's the climate that controls manipulation. When a person knows they can tell the truth and they will still be accepted, they're much more inclined to tell the truth and not be manipulated. But if they know they're gonna just get beat on, rejected, condemned, criticized, ostracized, if that's the spirit of the church, condemnation and judgment, you're gonna get a whole lot of manipulation. So it's absolutely fundamental to a church that Stanford Church of Christ, and it's all about grace. Yep, that's it. I'm getting worked up. You know, so it's those kinds of things. I want to spend a little bit of time on the power of Jesus. And a number of the stories that Jesus tells, the incidents he's involved in, the Good Samaritan or the rich young ruler, begin with people coming with a question that's meant to steer Jesus in one direction or another. And what he does is asks his question, his counter question, or he tells a story. In the case of the Good Samaritan, well, who is my neighbor? Paying taxes to Caesar. The Pharisees believe they've got him on that particular case. And he says, well, show me a coin. Whose inscription? Well, give to Caesar what's due to Caesar and give to God what's due to God. But it's always the counter question. Which, you still have agency. You don't need to be run over. One of the keys to handling manipulation, and even handling it lovingly, is knowing you have agency and just follow what Jesus is doing, which is ask your questions. And then sometimes the story will be more effective than just charges and counter charges. It's obvious that the Gospels, Jesus and his followers, are aware of manipulation and take a stand against it. In the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus says, "Watch out for false prophets," we immediately jump to that. In the old days, some denominational group, not us. So those are the false prophets. They disagree with us on how many times a month you take communion. False prophet. And I'm pretty sure in the Gospels, at least as often, I think more often, Jesus is talking about people who act falsely, who know they're not telling the truth, so the clear example of that would be in Acts 20:28 to 30, when Paul's talking to the elders in Ephesus. It's last time he supposes he'll get to be with them. And he talks about, from your own numbers, savage wolves will come out, devouring the flock. Well, that, more often than not, the savagery begins with manipulation, with someone working behind the scenes to do this, to do that, and Scripture takes a strong stand on that. The truth. You expose, you bring daylight to bear on what's going on, but you never let people doubt that you care about them. In Matthew 6, back in the Sermon on the Mount, in chapter 6, anyone familiar with the Sermon on the Mount? Could you quote that for us? Which verse? Verse is 1 to 18. No, but that's, that's the whole section where we're praying, giving gifts. But do not do what you do to be seen by others. So that, that's manipulation, when you do what you do to be seen by others. So I'm saying scripture is challenging this all the time. But then we've come back to this sub theme. There comes a time, and this is in Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount, in chapter 6 of Luke, verses 27 to 38. It says, "Lend to your enemies without expecting to get anything back." That to me, love your enemies. Okay, I'll find some way to claim I love my enemies, because I'm a good guy, right? Okay, but lending to in the context is there's not just lending to anyone, lending to your neighbor who's maybe asked you a few too many times, but now it's lending to your enemy, not expecting that you'll get paid back. And saying that there's power in that too, because that kind of upsets the apple cart, as in, oh, wait a second, what makes this person tick? And yet, it's discretion. You have to, I'm calling for transparency as often as I can possibly get it. But there does just come a time when you say, the best thing to do here is to let it go and not expect it back. And that solves a lot of problems, incidentally, including not spending the next 2 years wondering when I'm going to get paid back. Well, maybe I will and maybe I won't. I'm kind of going with I may not. And that's okay. Not real happy, but that's okay. But for further thought, I think we sort of covered that. But one of the things that happens in a church is someone starts supposing someone has an agenda, and I suppose they're thinking that if they're thinking that fairly, it could be because they hear the same thing all the time, like this person's on that subject all the time. They feel like we're speaking from a power position and others' voices aren't heard. They sense something. In other words, there's a possibility that they're correct, but as often as not, the charge itself is manipulation. That I disagree with what a person says, and to discredit what they're saying, that person has an agenda, I think. And
I was accused of having an agenda once in this church, and it's all based on a falsehood from the very beginning. And I had to go to this person and say, because the person that accused me of having an agenda got it from those people secondhand. So they had told this person I was trying to do something which wasn't true. And somebody brought it back to me that this person that I hadn't spoken 2 words to was telling him that, I was going to ruin the church. And so I had to go back to the source and say, this 4 principle thing that you have said, which was false. I confronted this person about it and I said, well, here's what you heard. And I handed this person a cassette. I mean, that tells you how long ago this was. And I just said, this has been said about, something that I'm trying to do. Here is what you heard. And I handed it to this person and they looked at it and just kind of sat down and walked away. Yeah, don't do that to me.
thank you, everyone. Great discussion tonight, and I thank each of you.
Thanks,
You all-
Al. Good job. Take care, everyone.
Oh, I wanted to say that Lexi